Hello, and welcome to Religion of Freedom. My name is Herb, and I'll be your guide for this journey down the rabbit hole. Today I'm going to talk a little bit more about the West Coast mermaid, and we're going to look at her anatomy and talk about some of the things that could possibly be going on inside of her body and around her body. And hopefully we can help answer some questions that many people have had about the area over the years. In my previous video, I discussed how her breast is full of salt, and that's where the Salt Lake City comes from, the Salt Lake in Salt Lake City, and the salt mines down there, also in the area. They come from her breast, and I talked about how the Grand Canyon is an excavation site where her blood was pulled up, and it was full of gold right there at this giant gaping wound in her body. And it was dug out after the gold had solidified by very large machines or hydro picks. And what I want to talk about today is the large cavernous area that should be there in her sternum. If you look beside her, you can see that most of her internal organs are hanging out there. There's blood everywhere. The area is really red. Geologists have a hard time trying to figure out how the rock got so twisted, and all that stuff. It's pretty cool to have a better understanding about what is going on and how these things came to be. Right now, we're going to talk about the empty space that is in her sternum, and I did some research, and I found that Death Valley, the area here at the northmost part of it, is the subject of many legends and myths about underground cities and tunnel systems that were inhabited by giants, which would be evident by the mummies that they said they found. In 1947, a San Diego, California newspaper talked about a man named Howard Hill who had a story of another man named Bruce Russell, who claimed to have discovered a series of complex tunnels deep below the Death Valley in 1931. That was 16 years prior to the article being written. The story says that Russell fell through a cave while trying to sink a mining shaft, and he began to explore it, and he found the remains of giant men that were 8 to 9 feet tall, and they wore clothes of a jacket and trousers, and they were made of a leather that they did not know what kind of animal it was. And they also found Egyptian and Native American artifacts, and they found about 32 tunnels that they estimated to run 180 miles across Death Valley and parts of southern Nevada. So after returning to the surface and gathering support for further exploration of the tunnels, Dr. Russell could not find the site again. Later on, Dr. Russell disappeared, and his car was found abandoned with a burst radiator in a remote area of the Death Valley. His partner seemed to fade away into obscurity. Some people think it may be a hoax, but there's a similar story in the 1920s where a prospector named White claimed he had fallen through a floor of an abandoned mine at Wingate Pass in the southwest corner of Death Valley. He said he fell into an underground tunnel, and that going deeper into the labyrinth, he came to a group of rooms where he found hundreds of leather-clad human mummies surrounded by gold bars and other treasure. There were rooms and tunnels that extended deeper into the catacombs, and they were lit with a pale greenish yellow light of unknown origin, but they did not follow the tunnels deeper into the unknown. White claimed that he had explored the catacombs 2 more times after his initial find. The second time he took his wife, and the third time he took a prospector friend named Fred Thomason. There was another person around the same time named Tom Wilson who had worked as a trapper and guide in the area, and he told a similar story He claimed that his grandfather had discovered the below-ground caverns of Death Valley many years before. His grandfather had gone into a cave that led into numerous tunnels and large rooms beneath the valley floor. After wandering for miles and miles, his grandfather had come to an underground city where he found a group of fair-skinned people that spoke an unknown language and wore light leather clothing. He also said the people had horses, and they were sustained by food he had never seen before. He also said that there was pale greenish yellow lights illuminating their city. Wilson's grandpa had told him this story his whole life, and when he heard White's story, he knew that that was the same place. So they got together and they tried to lead a group of archaeologists to the city entrance, but they were never able to find it. Wilson, he kept on for the rest of his life, trying to find an underground city till he died. And then what is weird is Wingate Path, which was absorbed into the China Lake Naval Weapons Center and is close to the public now. It also involves another story by a prospector named York Lee in his book Death Valley Man, published in 1932. He tells of an underground city located in the Panament Mountains of the Death Valley, where two men named Jack and Bill were exploring near Wingate Pass, and one of them fell through a shaft, and his partner followed in, and they found, the natural underground caverns, just like the other stories. They claim to have followed 20 miles north into the heart of the Panament Mountains, and they eventually arrived at a large ancient underground rooms where they reportedly found several perfectly preserved human mummies who had gold spears and big thick armbands of gold. And their place was illuminated by subterranean gases, and they found rooms full of treasure. But of course, just like the other stories, they were never able to find them again, and there really is no proof that those stories are really true. There's a couple of details that I thought were pretty interesting in the stories. One of the stories, there was a room that they found that was really dark, and it smelled like snakes, and it was just like a pit. They threw a rope down in there, and as far as they could, never could find the bottom of it or anything. They never would go in there, but they said it was really dark, and they think there was some kind of liquid down there, some kind of toxic liquid, oily type substance. And in that same place, they had some hardened copper tools, and people couldn't figure out how they had hardened the copper in that way, because copper is usually pretty soft. And I think that maybe that pit was the oil that was used to actually harden the copper like you would harden steel. And maybe it did have something to do with snakes, and it had some kind of anatomy that came from snakes or reptiles, or snake blood or snake venom, could have been an ingredient in the hardening process of that copper. I don't know, that's just an idea. And another thought that I had about those stories was the leather, that they couldn't identify what animal it came from. Possibly it could have been part of the mermaid's skin. They could have gotten there while the mermaid was fresh and made all of them some clothes out of her skin. Similarly, I have seen the stories about where they found a sword or something metal that was made out of a metal that they could not understand how they made that metal, or they can't really identify that type of metal. And since there's different types of creatures that have been all over the world, and giants, of course it could be a creature that we don't know of and that was obscure, and maybe their carcass isn't around anymore or has been covered up. So if there's a metal that exists that we don't understand what its origin is, then that most likely means that it came from an animal that we cannot identify. And finally, with the Death Valley legends and myths, there is also the myth of Shenaav, which claims that 5,000 years ago, a society lived in the underground there, in a grand and glorious city. Well, there's certainly room for one or more cities down there, I'm sure. But like I said before, none of these stories have ever been proven, and they could all be myth. But I did just kind of think that there should be empty spaces in her sternum there, since her guts are all hanging out beside her. And I just went and looked for proof from there. So this is what I found. If you like this type of content and you're interested in this type of thinking, then please give me a like and a subscribe, and it encourages me to do more videos. I've got a lot to say. Thank you.